Well, hello again. It's now time for another episode of the missing Beatles surround sound tapes. Well, there's been a lot. That's why there hasn't been a show. There's been a lot of developments, but they weren't clear as to exactly what was happening. And so I've had to work on them to find out, well, was there something new really on the market, or no? Is this the same old stuff being resold? So I'm your host, Glenn, and we're going to get into the surround sound recordings of the Beatles that you cannot buy in your local store or online. I don't think there is a local store anymore, is there? So, you know this stuff about if you like it, please like it, and hit the bell and subscribe, da-da-da. But I want to get into the very, very big developments. Okay, so on eBay, there is one seller who is actually selling almost the entire Beatles catalog of unreleased surround sound recordings. Now, at this wonderful podcast site, you can actually listen to some of the very early ones and also get my analysis of them, and you'll know that the very early recordings are just truly terrible. They sound good, but they also sound... I should clear that up. The sound quality is good because you're getting down to the very basic multi-track masters. But they trying to remix them so they sound like George Martin balanced them, so Twist and Shout, sounds like a car come crashing through the front window. Well, these don't have that. So when you look at this person's articles for sale on eBay, please stay away from Please Me. That you're not going to like that. The next one with the Beatles has very, very little in actual surround sound. I've mentioned this already, but Roll Over Beethoven is going to give you 3 channels for a little while. Please, Mr. Postman, that is when they went from 3 to 4, and that does give you a little bit of room to move there. So there you're getting surround sound. But other than that, the rest of it is just recorded 2-track or maybe 3, and it just doesn't really sound very good trying to turn it into 5 channels. Now, let's move forward a little ways. Once we get into Beatles for sale, Mamma mia, I believe that's 4 channels. And remember, whenever you talk 4 channels with the Beatles, you're actually talking 8 channels because they used to cheat. It's not cheating. And what they would do is they would record on all 4 channels. So we got the bass and guitar on 1, and then the piano and drums on 2, and George singing on 3, and Paul singing on 4. And so what they would do is they'd say, all right, we're going to take all 4 of those and mix those down to 1 channel. So let's start over. So now we've got all of those instruments on 1 channel. So now we've got 3 open, or let's say empty. And they would do more parts and record over it. And so you can easily hear, when you listen on these early Beatle recordings, you can hear the items that were sacrificed to be put on 1 channel and the ones that were later flown in, like the guitar on Roll Over Beethoven, the lead guitar. And you can hear the difference in the generational count of the tape, how many times it's been copied. And each time that it's copied, it just takes the life and the rock and roll out of the recording. So you can hear that real easily. But once you get to what I would call, or where I would say Beatles for sale, now all of a sudden, now you're getting 4 channels. And it's done very well. very, very well. You're getting a left rear channel, a right rear channel, and almost every song from the second song on has the vocals in the front and center. And most of them have background vocals either right behind the front singer or in the right or left rear or both. So it sounds stupendous. So if you're thinking of stocking up, what other ones would I say are great that are not out legitimately? Wow. I would say Something New. I mean, the album Something New, never one of my favorites. No, most people couldn't figure out what they were doing. Why are they taking all these old songs that had already been released and putting them out on an album when they had just put out Hard Day's Night, which had all the same albums? What are you doing? But the album Something New has just terrific surround sound, just your basic meat and potatoes, drums and bass over there in the left rear, guitars and background vocals in the right rear, lead singer in the front center, lead guitar front right, rhythm guitar, little sound effects and things front left. So it just sounds like 4 channels or 5 channels cooking, and it just sounds great. So those are the ones that I would buy. Now, a lot of people say, well, wait a minute. What about Magical Mystery Tour? Yes. Magical Mystery Tour is completely remixed. These people got a very early mix of it when the engineers were allowed, shall we say, they were entitled, I guess a better word, they were entitled to make it sound how they thought it would sound good. What a concept. And so they did. And so you get a surround sound mix on there that's just great. Well, why would the surround sound mix then be worse on those albums that have since come out, like Abbey Road, the White Album, Sgt. Pepper, and Let It Be? Well, because there's the secret agreement that they will not admit exists, but it does, that they made in 2005, I believe. I'd say I'd look it up, but actually I don't have the correct number anyway, so if I went to look it up, I wouldn't have the information. But I'll look it up for you. What the point of that was that there is the secret agreement that says every Beatles release that comes out now must sound the same, except for sound quality, but must sound the same as it did when it came out back then in the 60s. So if Giles Martin right now were going to make a surround sound version of what we used to call Beatles 65, God, I loved that album. And they called it Beatles for Sale. Well, Giles would have to follow the secret edict that said that the surround sound releases must sound basically like a very good version of the stereo. Like all the music coming from the front and maybe just some enhancers like making the room sound big or more echo out of the rear. But basically, it is just an enhanced version of stereo. And most of them sound terrible. And the reviews they get are uniformly terrible, just horrendous. And that's what they deserve, because they are that bad. But these that you can buy online from this person who's selling them, and it really does appear that he only has one copy of each, he or she, don't they were mixed before that rule came into effect. And who knows, maybe that's the reason that the Beatles rejected those mixes and said, no, we don't want those ever released to the public. Those are, no, those are not good. So what else can we find on there? Well, unfortunately for us, or for you, he's not selling one of the really fun projects or products that came out of that happy moment when somebody stumbled upon these surround sound mixes. So there is a recording. It's actually 2 discs, and it's called Beatles, okay? And it's called 5-Point Wonderful. Get it? 5-Point Wonderful. That's kind of clever. And what they've got is just moments, 10, 15 seconds, some are 30 seconds, some are a minute and a half, some are the entire song, very few, but there are some. And they're songs that you know the Beatles catalog, but you've never heard them in surround sound, especially like this. They are mixed for real surround sound from the multi-track masters. You can tell somebody worked hard to get solid left rear, right rear, so that there's equal work being done by the surround sound speakers. They're all putting out the same volume when you measure it at the sitting position. And 5-Point Wonderful is just, it lives up to its name. Some of the songs are not songs. Some of them will just be maybe 30 seconds of arguing by the Beatles, and maybe they start the song. But the arguing and the performance of the song are in surround. 5.1. And it is just mind-blowing, really and truly. So some of the songs that are on there are This Boy, that sounds great. I Want to Hold Your Hand, which even though it's only 3 tracks, it sounds pretty good too. Let's see. There's She's a Woman. There's I Feel Fine. And a bunch of other songs that you already know the names of that just sound so good in this surround mix that it's just amazing. But remember, some of them are just short snippets. And 5-Point Wonderful is not offered by this guy, but I did have a chance to listen to it again last week, and it is really just fun. What a kick in the pants to listen to the Beatles in the studio trying to get the song right, trying to get This Boy right, with Paul yelling, Ringo! Ringo! And then he yells at him, he says, and he gives him the instructions. Did you know that there was a right and a wrong way for Ringo to play the drums on I Want to Hold Your Hand? Well, Paul's yelling at him and saying, look, first one, boom. Second, louder, boom. The second one, attack. An attack, that's a drum term. That means the sound you get. So, very good. Let's get back to what you could buy, though, if you walked over to eBay and had some cash in your credit card that you wanted to spend. You could get the White Album. Well, wait a minute. I know you do. But here's the problem. The White Album you have in surround is pathetic. It is just pathetic. It has so little information out of the rears. The rears are really just an accoutrement for the fronts. They are not separate sources of multi-track sound. On the White Album. And that's why the reviews of the White Album were consistently sticky. Very few people liked the surround sound mix of the White Album, and every review is, well, this is the best we're going to get, so is it okay? Well, it's better than not getting surround sound, so they're really pathetic reviews. You can see these are people that wanted to say, this thing sucks, this is terrible. But because of financial relations with the vendors of the LP, they couldn't really say that, but that's what they're thinking. So, if you want to get the White Album from this person who's on eBay selling it, well, it's going to cost you over $100. Okay, so that's kind of sad. But, man, is it better. Jeez Louise. The recording is really 4-channel. It might be 5-channel. I know it's 4-channel for sure. And what it has is the songs and the singers and the birds that... Okay. All right, thank you. You too. So you can see that in this they're having not only the sound of the birds, which is very, very nice to hear the birds on Blackbird, and of course the plane on back in the USSR flies from the right rear speaker to the left rear speaker to the front speaker left, and then to the front right. So that's kind of cool. Although, planes don't fly that way. Planes don't fly around my room. But okay, but the person who mixed it went to the trouble of putting sounds out of the rear. So you actually get real surround sound music out of the right rear and left rear speakers. And it sounds dandy. And I just want to say, I don't want to waste an hour doing it, but the entire album is that way. So it's 2 albums, isn't it? It's 2 discs. So the entire 2 discs are completely remixed, and 50% of the sound energy comes out of the rear speakers. So every song, some of them, oh boy, some are even songs that I've hated, like Wild Honey Pie. Oh man, that's a terrible song, but you ought to hear it with the in the rear speakers. It is just mind-blowing. And so if you have a chance to pick that up, I would definitely go for it. Now, that exact same argument goes for Sgt. Pepper. Now, as you probably know, Sgt. Pepper was the biggest disappointment since Hash Oil. It was better than nobody ever giving a surround sound. Boy, there's high praise. But really and truly, it was just chicken pottle. It was somebody who did not have the courage to mix aggressively the rear channels. And in some ways that's understandable, because that would be a lot of work. Remember, Sgt. Pepper, you're only getting 4 channels to start with, and after that the person has to go to a second 4-channel tape recorder and find where's the guitar. Okay, it's right here on channel 3 on the 3rd recorder. These engineers and producers were not used to having to go from machine to machine to find the song they're looking for. Normally, if you have 16 tracks, they're all on one machine, and you sit at a desk and you pick out which track you want to hear. So if here's the spot where you're going to hear a triangle, you would just go over to the triangle. There it is on track 9. There it is. We'll bring up the volume a little bit. Okay, don't want it to go into the red. Triangles do not sound very good in the red. They really don't. So, and that's why you do it. But you don't have to say, where's the 3rd tape recorder? Where's that? Okay, let's run that. Now, it's my understanding, and there's no articles written on this, but the little tiny bit I know about it is they did wisely take the tape recorders for each song on Sgt. Pepper and put them into a final 12-track version so that they could sit at their console and mix it just like anybody else. So, in other words, all three of the recorders, and on some there were more, so of the recorders, their individual tracks were synced up. And believe it or not, that's easier to do than it sounds. I used to think, how in the world could they ever get it right? But they do. These people are pretty smart, and they do have a system there, an electronic system that matches a tone at the very beginning of each tape and gets it to where it happens at the exact same second on all three machines. And they do. It works real well. It really does. It works. But the way they keep it constant is it comes off of the waves of electricity in the power that comes out of the wall. So it knows that it's getting 60 cycles there, and it just uses that to say, okay, well, this is 60 cycles. Here's, I think that's in a second, so it says here's 1 second, and it just measures each track and says, okay, this one starts here, this one starts here, here's how you line them up. So that works real well, and that is how Sgt. Pepper could have been made really great. But again, they were under the directions. I wonder if there's a better word for that. They were under the prohibitions, yeah, there you go, of the Beatles. And so they had to make what sounded very much like the Sgt. Pepper album that you've known all these years. It was 20 years ago today, blah, blah. So it had to sound like that, but just maybe with an enlarged, I don't want to say engorged, that would be kind of rude, wouldn't it? An engorged rear channel. And it got reviews that basically matched up to what it sounds like. It was just terrible. Just terrible. And so this one that you can buy on eBay, if it's this guy, and unfortunately he's selling them for $90 a CD. That's pretty high. It is a different mix, and it is one where the people doing the mixing had absolutely no fear of using the rear channels as a source of music. And they had no hesitancy to do so. And it sounds 100 times better. Except in sound quality, I do have to say that. That's not true on sound quality. If we're looking at which one has the best bass and treble and mid-range and all of that stuff that makes good sound quality, the legitimate release of Sgt. Pepper is way better. And that's because the format that the Sgt. Pepper is released in is in DTS, which is not a lossless format. It is one where the files are reduced in size by triggering computer programs that listen to the music and say, oh, what could we cut out here that no one will notice, in order to make the files smaller. And that's what it does, and DTS does a pretty good job. It does a pretty good job, but it does not ever sound as good as a full-fledged either DVD audio or an SACD. So it is a lossy format, and that means that the music is put into a blender and has part of its contents taken out in order to make the files smaller so that they can squeeze them out of 6 channels. Okay? You with me? All right, good. So the sound quality of these that the guy is selling, because they are DTS or in some cases Dolby, don't worry. There's like the difference between those two is something that you do not have to worry about. It will not affect your appreciation of the Beatles music. But the difference between Dolby or DTS and regular surround sound, which is like you would get on the White Album, is the sound quality is not the same. There's quite a dip on these DTS discs. They don't have the same sound quality. But on the other hand, you're trading lesser sound quality for having, full use of the rear channels, for having full volume music, guitars, bass, drums, everything coming out of the rear channels, and that is, to some people's minds, worth it. It was to mine. I did not pay $90. So here's the really funny part about that, and I mean, this is just this is a real chuckler. For the people that say, I don't know, another $100 or something, I don't know. I don't want to. Oh, geez, I don't know. $100? I don't want to spend another $100 on the White Album. I already have the White Album in surround, mixed by Giles Martin, the worst music mixer since George Martin. I know. Don't send angry stuff because, think this over. George Martin is the guy who mixed Rubber Soul with all the voices coming out of the right channel and all the music coming out of the left channel. One of the stupidest, worst mixing decisions ever. So you might be thinking to yourself, how can I make that decision worse? What could I do to step into George Martin's horrible mistake and just make it into almost a tragedy? You could then pass a rule saying that no one's allowed to fix that. That any version of Rubber Soul that comes out must now sound like the one that came out in 1966. Well, that's horrible. Why would anybody ever do that? I don't know, but that's what the Beatles did. Well, if you buy that surround sound version of Rubber Soul that's on eBay, and we're talking right now is the 24th of December, I think that's pretty close to Christmas. What day does Christmas fall on this year? What? 25th? Okay. So, I guess we're one day from Christmas. It's on eBay now, and if you were to buy that White Album, you would not only get everything you got in surround sound on the expensive White Album, the really expensive one, but it also comes in surround sound with 2 extra songs. Wait a minute. How could they do that? I don't know. But it has the 2 songs that were so horrible that George Martin just threw them out and said, no, those are never coming out. And that's where they should have remained, because they both stink. But, stink terribly. They're just terrible, terrible songs. So the White Album that you can buy on eBay that is not legitimate, that, what record label is it under? I think it's on the TOUP record label. And what songs it has the awful What's the New Mary Jane, which is just terrible. Should have never come out. They should have kept that in the safe to protect their reputation. And Not Guilty, which, seeing as how it came out later on a George Harrison album, and it shouldn't have, they could have just, actually, you know what? Think about it, though. Really, George Martin did do that correctly. He buried those, and they were not supposed to come out. They never were supposed to come out. But unfortunately, they did come out on the Sessions LP, which was a project that was going to come out, and they put it together, and they said, this is back in the 1980s. And they said, look, we're going to have a new Beatles album of unreleased crap that was never released when the Beatles were together. Oh, boy, that's something. Yeah, let's get it going. Yeah, that's great. Well, if you listen to it, it's just really shitty. I mean, I had it, and I must say, I listened to it every morning before I went to work for 5 years at least. Every morning, nonstop, 5 years. So the idea that there was a new Beatles album, and better yet, one that the only place I could hear it was at my house, was tremendous. And so I used to get up every morning, every goddamn morning, and listen to that album. But, be that as it may, it wasn't very good, and they wisely put a stop to it. They pulled the plug. From what I heard, it was right at the last minute, too. It was in the process of being pressed, into LPs, and it was just ready to be pressed and ready to go, and somebody came to their senses and said, this sounds terrible. There are actually two mixes of it. One with a wet mix with a lot of reverb and stuff to make it sound a little more lively. It doesn't sound any more lively. It just sounds like death in a swimming pool. And then another one that has just a flatter sound that just has no life to it at all. They all begin with the Beatles, which it's not clear whether it was an audition or whether it was a test of their equipment, but it was from their stage show, Besame Mucho, and it's not much. It's an okay version, Paul belting out the song, and then after that it's got their how do you do what you do to me, which they did not write, but that was what George Martin said was going to be their breakthrough single. And they did not like it. And he told, I'll tell you what, you can write a better song than that. We'll do your song. Okay, so the gauntlet was thrown down, and John and Paul got together and came up with the infinitely less appealing Love Me Do. And George Martin, I guess, thought, whatever. And he said, okay, that is better. And they released Love Me Do, and Love Me Do did go to number one, at least in the UK. So that's that. Those are the things that I would suggest you pick up on eBay. And here's the big news. There is a new release in surround sound. What? What is there that's left to release that hasn't been done? Well, actually, there are two, aren't there? Yeah, two. Well, is that a new one? Well, okay. What are they? Well, you better sit down because this is really exciting. What is, you know the answer to this, what is the best sounding Beatles stereo album? I mean, just the best we're talking about the best sound quality. And maybe the best mixes too. But we're talking new mixes, new sound quality, and there's only one album that has that, so you already know. That's the Beatles' Yellow Submarine Songbook. Okay? Or no, it's called Songtrack, sorry. The Beatles' Yellow Submarine Songtrack. Like soundtrack, but songtrack. So, isn't that crazy? That album at the time was just unbelievable. It knocked people's socks off because Peter Coben, a well-known just music mixer, he'd been all through the wars, and he knew what he was doing. He was given the job of taking the songs, not the album, the songs that were on the Yellow Submarine album, filling them out with some extra good stuff by the Beatles. No instrumentals by George Martin. Oh, man. What a cheap way to get George Martin rich. Have him write songs that are on a Beatles album. God. All right. So what they did was they put out the Yellow Submarine song track, and it has all of the songs from the movie Yellow Submarine, except it has them in first generation tape. So he went back to the multi-track masters. This is not from the stereo tape that was made from the mixes that were made from the multi-tracks that were mixed down from... No. He was allowed to go into the tapes before they were blended and put together. So before they were squished and 4 channels made into one, he got to go to the 4 channels because George Martin had very wisely, and I mean very wisely, made a rule right at the time of the recording of With the Beatles. And that rule was not 1 second of tape of the Beatles recording is to be erased or thrown out. Every last second of them playing is to be saved. So what happened? So Peter Coben, given the job of Yellow Submarine song track, got the multi-track masters and reassembled them and made completely new mixes that were no relation, had nothing to do with the old mixes. He mixed it so that it sounded good to him. And man, the reviews were 10 plus, 10 plus, 5 stars, 5 stars. Just, it rocked the world. They were only in stereo. Now, at some time in 2014, for reasons I don't understand, it was remastered. Now, remastering normally means the sound quality was improved. In other words, so somebody did something to the recording to enhance the sound quality, but didn't do anything to affect, is John in the left speaker or the right speaker, or John singing too loud or too soft. That kind of correction, that's remixing. That's much more profound, much more difficult to do, much more costly. This one is just one where somebody listened to the album and said, well, let's turn that treble up a little bit, see if we can make that cymbal sound a little more bell-like. So that happened in 2014, but again, it was in stereo. Okay? So the very best stereo mix of the Beatles has always been, since 1989, has been the Yellow Submarine song track. The sound quality, it just make you jump out of the window. It's so good for songs, especially like Nowhere Man. Oh my God, does that sound good. It's the first time that only a Northern song is in real, honest-to-God stereo. It's not in that bogus mono that every other format of it, every other rendition of it is in terrible monaural with crank, oh God, the treble on the right channel and the bass on the left. Sounds horrible. Well, this is, not only did Peter assemble a completely stereo version with separate tracks, no nonsense simulated stereo, but he found every bit of the tape, every last second of the recordings, and there were different takes, and he assembled them into the longest possible take. So it's almost 7 minutes long. It has an extra verse over almost everything you've ever heard, and the sound quality is just to live for. It's just something you can't believe it's done that well. And that's the kind of job he did. I'm getting to the point. The point is, hey, it's out now in surround sound. Surround? Yeah, you can get it in surround. So, what else is out in surround that would blow the minds of your neighbors? There is an album called Another Abbey Road. So this is, the pirate people have gotten their hands on different takes of Abbey Road, and I have not heard this album. And instead of using the take that's on the Abbey Road album, they picked the second best take they could find and made a surround sound recording of it. Always leaving, I know how they do this, they always leave in some talking so that you know that it's not just some cheap, they disguised, they upmixed the album. It'll always have the talking about Ringo, okay, now I want you doing drumming here, come in 1, 2, and so you can hear that it's really them recording the album. And that is what is also out. It's a variation, it's called Another Abbey Road, and it's the complete Abbey Road album with some bonus cuts, and it is surround sound 5.1. No, I haven't heard it. I do have to say that I purchased the Let It Be 5.1 that is on Voodoo Records. And holy mogoly, wowzer weezer. And I believe this was made before the legitimate Let It Be came out. I think this is from the tapes that that we've been talking about here now for 6 months. And not only does it have a fantastic 6 surround speakers, all of them just blaring. And so you get John and Paul out of front, rears, every place it's just fantastic. But it has about 7 or 8 bonus cuts. So where else are you going to get cuts off of Ram, which is not out in surround? I think there might be a cut on one of those McCartney best of. Yeah, I don't know, but there's some cuts from Ram. There's Live and Let Die. There's a few cuts from Band on the Run. There's George Harrison's My Sweet Lord in surround sound. And boy, does it sound good. Yes, it does. All right, well, that's it for this week, month. I'm going to have a big surprise next time, which will be the end of next week, probably the first week of January. And I'm actually going to play a few of these songs so that you sitting at home can actually hear the Beatles in surround. You won't have to have me talking about what it's like. We're going to play a couple of the cuts, and of course I'm going to play the ones that are not out, that you can't just go buy commercially over at the Warehouse or Tower Records or wherever you go to buy your music. And so that'll be on the next show. We'll have at least 2 and possibly up to 4 Beatles songs that are not out in surround anywhere. They're not out in any rendition anywhere like that. And you'll be able to hear them as long as you've got a surround sound setup. And that means, you got 5.1 speakers and a 5.1 receiver. And you got amps that'll power 5.1. You're ready to go. And you'll hear the Beatles like you've never heard them. And that'll be next week. See you then.